Hello, friends. These days we've been traveling to Greece and also to Scotland to see how they are coping with the COVID crisis. And now we're going over to Ireland to speak to Fintan Dunne of breakfornews.com. Hello, Fintan.
How are you doing, Pilar? And it's great to be with you here today. Thanks.
My pleasure, Fintan. My first question is, how are things in Ireland? Tell us about it.
Okay, in Ireland, things are going exceptionally well, although that's not something the government wishes to speak about because it doesn't want to diminish public commitment to the lockdown. We're running certainly around about half of the projected level that this was projected to run at by the most conservative forecasts. We have, in the last 24 hours, had a situation where 4,000 hospital beds are empty in Ireland, and around about 1 in 6 of a range of private hospitals, hospital beds which have been contracted by the government, are full. So we really have an undercapacity hospital system, and we're easily coping with the current level of the virus.
I've been watching a lot of very interesting videos on your website, and we're speaking about a lot of very interesting things. For example, the Swedish case, about the problem with medical protocols, about immunity, vaccines, etc. But my question now is, because I'm very interested, because I think we are having the same problems everywhere.
Yes, yeah.
I want to know your view on the Swedish case, for example. Is the Swedish count still dropping?
Well, yes. Sweden, I'm happy to report, has beaten COVID-19. They have tamed the virus as far as I'm concerned. What we've seen in Sweden is that for around about 9-10 days now, they have been descending from a peak which they hit in new cases. And we see, although deaths did spike recently, that was as a result of the COVID-19 virus getting into nursing homes, which is a problem now internationally. And really, it highlights how we missed the point on this one. So they did have a spike. But I'm happy to report that Sweden today has seen new intensive care cases drop to a level that hasn't been seen for a month. They had 21 new admissions to intensive care today. We haven't seen that kind of figure since back in the middle of March. They've beaten this, I think, and their no lockdown policy has now been vindicated.
Fintan, your analysis on statistics and data is quite particular. How is your view? What do you think? Why did the governments so badly overestimate the risk? Because we're making same mistakes everywhere.
Yeah, well, the WHO is a clear reason why they overestimated risks, because the WHO was putting out mortality projections of 3.4%. And these kinds of statistics alarmed governments, and they were being put out by a seemingly reputable organization. We now know that's perhaps an 80 times overstatement of the actual risk. So that was the start. Also, Wuhan scared them. Wuhan happened and was locked down in the way it was because the Chinese missed the boat. The Wuhan had peaked before China locked it down, and that was the problem. So they'd missed the boat and had to act in an overhanded manner because of that. Then Italy, they misinterpreted Italy. Italy happened because we had perfect storm. We had virus coming in from China very early on, unchecked, spreading. We had elderly population very, very high. We had highest atmospheric pollution in Europe, in Milan area. And then we had a complete transfer of the virus into the elderly population because they live together in Italy. They don't live apart like in the Anglo-Saxon world. The elderly live in the extended family. And so this created a wave of cases that came forward that we've since seen does not represent the general situation. So that scared them all, yeah.
what is the true mortality rate for people from this COVID-19, Fintan?
Okay, it's a shocker. And it's good news that the true mortality rate is shockingly low. And I say that because I'm starting off from the 3.4% WHO figure. That was always a case fatality rate, as it's called in medicine. It means that it's the number of people we know about with the virus who have died. So if we know about 100 people who have the virus and 3 of them die, then we have a case fatality rate of 3%. But there could be hundreds more who have it and never came to medical attention. And this is an issue that was resolved around about 4 or 5 days ago as a report came out from a Stanford study which tested people in Santa Clara County in California. There's around about 2 million people in the county. And what they did was they did antibody tests. They advertised on Facebook and asked them all to show up for tests. The antibody tests showed that around about 3.5% of the population of Santa Clara County had contracted the virus. This was shocking because they only had 1,000 patients who had shown up with the virus, yet here they were getting data showing there was another 69,000 people who had the infection and hadn't needed medical attention. Now that was a game changer, Pilar. That now gave us finally the denominator. It finally gave us the size of the invisible iceberg of what you call asymptomatic cases. And it's a huge iceberg. It means that the risk has now dropped from 3.4% case mortality rate to an infection mortality rate in the general population of 0.33%.
So according to the Swedish experience and all these figures, do you think we should should the rest of the countries be changing the model and is or lift the lockdown?
They should definitely need to look at lifting the lockdown, even on the basis that Sweden has now proven that you can do this without the strict lockdowns we've applied. You see, this virus is extraordinarily contagious, and to a certain extent, you can't stop it, and you're really going to wear yourself out trying. So, fortunately, however, it's extraordinarily benign. That ratio of 6,900 people who have no symptoms for every 100 people who show up in hospital. That's our true threat here. And that's a very, very nice ratio to have for the general population. So that means we can afford to relax because by a huge margin of 70-1, we're going to have asymptomatic or minorly symptomatic individuals versus the ones who are exposed. And that means as well that the mortality rate risk for a younger person is now in the order of 200,000-1. If you go back out now to work, 300,000-1 is your mortality risk, and it's going to decline. I think on that data, we can go back to work.
We're seeing a lot of cancellations. The Camino de Santiago in Santiago Compostela is being cancelled. St. Patrick's Day, that's crazy. St. Patrick's Day in Ireland and all over the world has been cancelled. And Oktoberfest, etc. How do you see the economic consequences playing out?
Well, unless, I'm hopeful that there is a rebellion underway in the United States, which is going to limit the propaganda that we've been fed about lockdowns being vital. People in the United States aren't having it, many of them, and they want to get back to work. And the Swedish model is proving that a softer lockdown will work. So hopefully we can minimize the economic damage. But we are going to have to continue social distancing. There is no way out of this unless we have to maintain this virus, not on a declining basis, but simply on a basis that enables casualty departments to manage whatever the numbers coming in are. That's our only challenge here. But we are going to have to maintain social distancing for months in order to achieve that, many months. The good news, however, is that many of us go back to work. We can engage in gatherings of up to 50 people, and this really can be commenced immediately in most countries. Sweden has proven that model will work.
There's a lot of interesting things in your videos, and one of them caught my attention because you were talking about pollution and the levels of pollution and the connection of the levels of air pollution with COVID-19 and the explosion of COVID-19. And you're speaking about a lot of information that we cannot get from the mainstream media. Looks like we're having a war.
We are. We're having a propaganda war, definitely. So, the flaws in the way this is being presented by government is that, you see, there is no mention at all until, say, recent days of vitamin D. So why don't the government messages also say to you, as well as staying, away from public places, to get plenty of sun, go out the back garden, take your clothes off and get vitamin D into you. It's terrific, the best protection you could ask for. In other words, natural and herbal remedies don't exist in government land and haven't existed. And we'll have to ask ourselves why they didn't, bring forward those. Similarly, natural remedies like licorice root and elderflower, which are strong antivirals and widely available, those kind of medicinals were simply not even discussed. No, the whole aim of government was to get us to stay indoors. This is a policy crafted by Bill Gates because of his takeover of the preparedness industry for epidemics. And this lockdown model would produce the maximum number of vaccine candidates because none of us would have immunity. Whereas if we soldier it out and have a loose lockdown and allow the thing to spread, we won't need Bill Gates's vaccines. So this is the battle between those trying to keep you in and keep you a customer and those who want to release you and get you back to work, which I think we should do.
Fintan, do you think there is a disconnect between the data and the narrative we're being told by the mainstream media?
It's the lack of analysis. That's the mismatch. It's the simplistic, knee-jerk, blinkered focus on number of cases. It's the willingness of the media to look for the shot with the coffin in it, rather than to consider that as Professor John Lee in the United Kingdom has considered, the evidence that, in fact, what we're now doing, he says, in the United Kingdom, is that sometimes an equal number of people per day are dying from non-COVID causes as COVID in excess of normal rates. The media is not talking about it. The media doesn't want to talk about that except maybe mention it once and move quickly on. But that means that we are causing another tsunami of deaths in people who are not going for the operation they needed to go for, who are not turning up for vital appointments, who have got stroke risk and are not going and seeking medical attention. So it's disgraceful what has happened, Pilar.
Yes, we're having the same concerns here, and they're trying to spread the word that you have to check the doctor, check your heart, your diabetes level, your etc. etc. But we here in Galicia and Spain, we are suffering a lot of attacks in social networks. And we're watching a lot of, we're facing the debate about censorship, fake news. A couple of hours ago, for example, I was watching a tweet from a journalist from the Scotsman, and he was calling Broadcasting Scotland, which is a broadcast, is the best broadcast from a Scottish view, the best ever. And he was calling Broadcasting Scotland unregulated media.
Pirate radio. It reminds me of the founder of Radio Caroline, the pirate radio station, which broadcast from at sea, died today, actually, or yesterday, and a sad loss. But yes, one of the consequences of this is we've all had a wake-up call that Facebook and Twitter and to a lesser extent YouTube are not our friends. They're people who want to censor us based on government agendas and who want to prevent the free expression. For example, they have shut down now groups of people in the United States who were organizing protests against lifting the lockdown. Facebook has closed those Facebook groups. Hello. So I've had one of my videos taken down on how we shouldn't use too much anti-fever medication. That a certain amount of fever is okay. In when you have something, and that if you over medicate fever, you will take the temperature down too much, and that's not good. No, they took that off. So this is peer-reviewed information I'm providing there. So we've been shown that we do not own the social media we thought we owned, that we are increasingly being policed. And we'll have to go back to independent sites and perhaps use social media just as networking places, but put the content where they can't take it off.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of lessons to learn about this COVID-19, this global experience in a human level, in a social level, probably in a spiritual level too. But from your view, what lesson do we need to learn from this?
The first lesson I'd learned from it is that the 2008 financial crash didn't teach us the lesson. It's taken a second bout of emergency to teach us the lesson that when it comes down to it, the well-heeled, the well-off, the corporate sector and the bureaucracy will act in its own interests with disregard for the tragic and desperate consequences for the vast majority of the middle class and lower middle class. And they've done it again with their lockdown policies, which have destroyed our small business economy. And the corporates will be able to borrow money at low interest rates in order to move into the space left by small business. So this is yet another encroachment of the economic space by the corporate sector led by pharma. We've got to learn the systemic lessons there. And we've also got to disconnect epidemic planning from pharma's hands and from the hands of Bill Gates. We've got to put planning for these kinds of things back in the hands of public policymakers who develop long-term plans in the public interest. And we've also got to start actual testing of vaccines, safety testing, and demand safety standards for vaccines and rein them in, because that's their next cash cow. We've also got to remove the exemptions from liability, which has been given to vaccine manufacturers. These exemptions create a lure for greed and profit. And that promise of being able to market any old crap and then not be sued for it is a license to print money. We've got to take that away. Well,
Fintan, thank you very much. I could talk to you for hours because you have such a fantastic website, breakfornews.com. And that's the beautiful truth, as you say.
The beautiful truth. And you'll also get me on YouTube on Fintan Dunne, just FINTANDUNNE on YouTube. You'll find my channel. And it's great to talk to you again, Pilar. We've spoken before and you're always tuned in. So thanks.
We'll be in touch because I would love to follow the development of this crisis. So if you agree, we'll talk again soon. Okay?
That'll be great. Thanks very much, Pilar.
Thank you very much, Fintan. Thank you very much. And you all, you know what you have to do. Share the video, share the info, and visit Fintan's website. Okay? Bye.